Hello, it's Phil Jacobus. I'm here at my home in Woodstock, New York, where it's raining outside. It's August 7th at 11 a.m. Uh, Before we are joined by our guest, I'd like to look at one of the stories that appeared in our news, and that is that the first federal right to repair legislation has been filed to help hospitals through the pandemic. And this story appeared on our news yesterday. We were the first, I believe, to cover this. And we're joined by Robert Kerwin, who authored this piece. So let me welcome my guest today, Robert Kerwin. But before I do, let me also encourage you to sign up for our online news. There's always interesting things there. You'll be the most knowledgeable person at the water cooler. And now, without further ado, let's welcome my guest, Mr. Robert Kerwin. Robert Kerwin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Robert is the counsel, I always get your title incorrect, Rob, with
General Counsel to IMERS.
Yeah, and
right?
The IMERS is the International Association of Medical Equipment Remarketers.
Exactly right.
And Robert, or Rob as I call him sometimes affectionately, wrote the article that I just referred to a few moments ago. And Rob, tell us from 5,000 feet in the air, what is this proposed legislation all about?
So we're very excited. First time, to our knowledge, that the Congress has considered the right to repair, and it's going to, if approved, and it was filed yesterday, it's going to give emergency powers, which permits the hospitals and their agents, independent servicers, the ability to get information on service access, and separately, it will modify temporarily some of the copyright and patent laws which might be deemed to be a problem otherwise. And it's exciting. We're going to have a duty to disclose service access information, everything ranging from error logs to service keys, all the things that we think should be pretty much standard for when you're dealing with medical devices. We think the Joint Commission otherwise requires it, but we're very excited that Senator Wyden and his House co-sponsor, Congresswoman Yvette Clarke from New York, have taken the step of filing this legislation.
So how does this impact hospitals? How does it benefit hospitals, this proposed legislation?
Well, we know because we've heard from our members that regional and rural hospitals are having some challenges in getting service access information. We're, of course, in the imaging space, not in the ventilator space, but they're grappling with getting access in order to repair equipment on an expedited basis to be able to serve the most vulnerable and to serve in particular those who are subject to COVID issues. And CT, by way of example, I'm told is a diagnostic tool that's helpful. So the duty to disclose and permit the hospitals and independent services to get this information should aid the process. And I wanted to emphasize that it's only during this emergency time period, which Secretary Azar has now extended to the end of October, that this legislation would be in place. So it requires a duty to disclose information. It provides you can make incidental copies of equipment manuals and other things that are necessary without fear that this violates copyright infringement. And there's even a section that talks about the ability for a hospital to fabricate equipment, and it wouldn't necessarily be found to be in violation of the patent laws. Still didn't resolve whether or not they need to get a 510K or otherwise inform the FDA. But this is emergency legislation that we think will be very helpful. And I want to point out too, as a lawyer, it's got a provision that says if there are contracts pending which have different terms, then there is a provision in there that suggests those contracts could be null and void to the extent they interfere with the hospital's ability to take advantage of this emergency legislation. So we're very excited about having this get some traction. And we're very pleased, by the way, that a number of organizations have agreed to sponsor this. I see the Alliance, National Rural Health Association, some members of ACCE. I mean, there's a group backing what we think is just the right thing to do in the middle of the worst emergency pandemic we faced in recent times. So kudos to Senator Wyden and to Congresswoman Clark on that issue.
So do I understand that, if I understand correctly, healthcare providers and independent service companies will have greater access to diagnostic tools, passwords, and manuals, but
Error logs, yeah.
yeah, only. But this legislation, if passed, will expire when the state of emergency ends.
Exactly right.
If the state of emergency is extended, then I assume this legislation will likewise be extended.
I assume it as well because of the terms of the last read of the bill that I saw yesterday. And also want to mention that the Federal Trade Commission is supposed to render a report about the effects of this and also on how it assists or hinders innovation, and separately whether or not the industry is abiding by it. So there's an enforcement trigger in this. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, will have an overview right on this matter.
Now, what happens, what's the process going forward for those of us who don't remember our high school civics?
Well, I mean, and it's a little bit of a complicated, they say there's two things you don't really want to watch is how sausage and legislation gets made. In this case, we're going to see people quickly co-sponsor if they're interested. We're going to see an effort to tag this to some of the emergency legislation that's coming through. And we also understand, and I've referenced in the article, that there are detractors to this legislation, like MITRE in particular. There was information from Mr. Hope, who think that this is not the appropriate step and it risks a potential of having untrained technicians work on the equipment. We think that's the wrong space, and we point out the MOD reports show under 1% adverse events in connection with servicing. And so we think this concern is misplaced, but we understand that there will be some passionate views expressed on Capitol Hill as to whether this gets traction or doesn't get traction. The nice thing is that we'll hear rather shortly about this because it's meant to be emergency legislation to help address the current needs.
Well, when do we anticipate hearings, knowing more? I'm curious.
So my understanding is the House and Senate are right now out of session, and they're supposed to be on 24 hours notice to come back. So I don't know the exact schedule that Speaker Pelosi and Leader McConnell would be having relative to this. I'm hoping with .med's assent to give further updates as we hear them. And we expect there to be attempts to either put an amendment to the existing work or maybe a technical change as they work through the process and try and gain some momentum. So sorry, I don't have a more definitive.
Yeah, okay. Well, please do keep us informed. I would say that this is a pretty major development, all in all, because at no time in my memory have the manufacturers ever agreed to share this sort of documentation or material.
Well, I certainly think with the imaging, we're continuing to get feedback from our members that that's a challenge. I don't know the ventilator space that well. And I can't, but I think you're quite right. I think that this is a major development, the first in 25 years on a federal level that I've seen.
Well, Rob, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you, sir.
And I know that you probably played a role in suggesting this here and there. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.